Hey there, Matt here, checking in for this week's housing market update, and this week will be a bit different. This week I want to address the headlines that are going all over the place in our media right now about how realtors are compensated. If you're thinking of buying or selling a home anytime soon, this is something you need to understand, and we're here to educate you and make sure you understand what this means for you as a seller or a buyer. So just a quick backstory if you're not aware, and I've shared videos about this in the past, but if you're not aware, there's been multiple lawsuits across the country going on around how realtors are compensated. And the real simple way to explain it is it comes down to transparency, where sellers have been told for a long time that they have to pay a buyer's agent's commission. And then buyers have understood as well that it's, the seller is paying their agent and it's not negotiable. So what these lawsuits are trying to do is trying to bring more transparency to the process to say, hey, you know what? A seller should be able to negotiate what commission they pay with their listing broker, just as a buyer should be able to negotiate what they are paying to their buyer's agent. And you might say, well, wait a minute, I don't pay commissions as a buyer. Well, that's kind of part of the misunderstanding and the argument is that really, if you think about it, it's the buyer's money coming to the transaction. Let's say a seller is selling their home for $500,000. When the buyer gets a loan and brings a down payment and they bring $500,000 to the table, well, that $500,000 is paying off the seller's mortgage. It's paying all the brokerage fees and other title and escrow fees that the seller's going to have. It's really the buyer's money doing all these things. So that's the argument and the base of these lawsuits is saying, hey, there needs to be some changes made. So here's what's going on. The National Association of Realtors, NAR, has just proposed a settlement for $418 million related to these lawsuits. And essentially, now that's still a subject to court approval. And whether or not that amount gets approved or exactly what they propose gets approved remains to be seen. But we do believe there'll be some industry changes that will happen regardless, and they're going to go into effect this July. Now, there's going to be practice taking place much sooner than July, where some listing brokers or buyers brokerages are going to start implementing these changes much sooner than July. So there's really two major changes to share with you. Number one, there's no longer allowed to be a offer in the MLS. So when we list your home for sale, we put it in the multiple listing service, and on the MLS, for as long as I've been in the business, 20 years, we will put in the MLS how much of a commission, a cooperating commission, is being offered to the buyer's representative. So if you're a buyer buying a home and that agent pulls up the home, they'll know by looking at the listing what amount of compensation, what percent of compensation or whatever that is, they will be getting to guide you through that process. No longer as listing brokerages are we allowed to list a home in the MLS and put that amount in there. So that's the big change, the first change. The second big change is the buyer must, not suggested, must sign an agency agreement with a brokerage prior to looking at a home. Major change. There is a lot of buyer's agents that don't have their clients sign buyer's brokerage agreements or agency agreements. And there's some brokerages that might say, hey, you know what, we'll go show you a home for the first time or maybe a few times out. And then they'll have a conversation with you about the process and how we get compensated for our services, and ultimately have you sign a buyer agreement. Just like you sign a listing agreement to sell your house, you would sign a buyer agreement to be represented as a buyer. So what the massive change happening is no longer can a broker, as of July, show you even one property without having you sign a buyer's brokerage agreement. So massive change, and that's not a Team Farnham or Five Realty thing. That is a national realtor thing that we will all have to abide by. So as you know, our mission here is loving Las Vegas through real estate. And one of the ways we do that is to make sure that you have the education and the guidance and you get your questions answered. We want you to feel represented, educated, and comfortable so you can just trust the process. So let me shed some light on these things real quick. Number one, they're no longer able to offer compensation in the MLS. So if you're a seller, I'm going to talk to sellers real quick and I'm going to talk to buyers. If you're a seller, you might be saying, hey, this is great. Maybe I don't have to pay commissions anymore. Well, we can't offer commissions in the listing anymore, but a seller is able to offer concessions. Now, a buyer can get those concessions and use them to pay closing costs. They could use them to pay their broker if they have a broker agreement to compensate their representative and so forth. So there's still definitely could be a competitive edge or marketing strategy to offering a seller concession, so those buyers, they're really shouldering a lot of the costs in the purchase with the lending fees, of course, their down payment and everything else. So adding an element of buyer compensation to many, many buyers when affordability is already a challenge, it could be an extra element of challenge for them to buy your home. So there could be some very big strategy in offering some concessions that the buyer can use to offset whatever their total expenses are buying the home. So something to think about there. I do have strong professional opinions for most of our sellers on how we will be advising to go about this. However, it is not a one-size-fits-all, and that's important to say. It's not a one-size-fits-all. We'll need to look at your home, look at the comparative market analysis, look at the right positioning in the market, the marketing strategy, all things considered, who's probably our avatar, our ideal buyer, and understanding their situation they're probably in, and then coming up with the best plan from there, and we would advise you accordingly, okay? So here's the thing with the home buyers. Affordability is a challenge. You might be thinking, well, now that I have to pay my buyer's broker because that's separate, how will I ever be able to afford a home? And I want to encourage you, you've kind of always paid the buyer's broker, although it hasn't really been said that way or conveyed that way. But in reality, you have, because as I said before, it's been the buyer's money coming to the transaction to really take care of all these expenses. So this is just going to be shaped a little bit differently and look a little bit differently. But at the end of the day, it's the same bucket of money in reality, okay? And I want to encourage you with a perspective on this. Is for years, if you live in Las Vegas, right now I'm at our office here, right around Eastern and Sunridge Heights, 89052 zip code, okay? And we're on Southeastern. If I'm going to drive to Mount Charleston, and for years, I don't know what route you would take from Southeastern to Mount Charleston, but I think many of you would say, hey, I'm going to probably shoot down Eastern, I'm going to hop on the 215 to the 15, up to the 95, and head up to Mount Charleston. Well, that's what we've done for a long time, but there's multiple ways to get to Mount Charleston. In fact, I Googled it, and here's what's kind of funny about this analogy here, is if you Google our office, Google Map to Mount Charleston, there's 3 routes that are suggested. One of them is an hour and 9 minutes, one's an hour and 10 minutes, and one's an hour and 12 minutes. So this is a perfect example of what we're going to experience in the months and years to come in real estate. Is before, most of us probably defaulted to Eastern to 215 to 95 to Mount Charleston. But now, maybe some people have to take the 215 all the way around. And you know what? It takes the same amount of time to get there. It's the same end result. You get up to the mountains and you enjoy the beautiful scenery. We get to the finish line, which is getting you into your new home. It just might be a different route and shaped a little bit differently to how we get there. Now, the details of that, we would need to sit down and unpack that together. We do that through a buyer strategy session, which is another way to say a formal buyer consultation. There's just a lot we need to do to slow down, educate you, make sure you understand everything that goes into purchasing a home, so then we can slow down to speed up and move faster and more efficient and ensure the best experience possible for you. But here's the key. If you're going up the 215 or the 95 to the 15 or whatever route you're going, who's driving the car? Who are you trusting to drive that vehicle with all the nuances and changes that we're navigating, that GPS that we're navigating on this journey? So I want to challenge you with that. So who you work with matters. I've said that before, but now more than ever, who you work with matters. And number 2, the change about the buyer must sign that agency agreement. We've been actually a proponent of this for a while now because there's already been changes happening with the way buyers are compensated because these lawsuits have been out and we knew these types of changes were coming down the path. And here's how we ensure the best experience for our clients, and that is to educate you. We have been letting our clients know, especially these last year or two more than ever, of how we get compensated, because there are situations where we run into homes where they're not offering a typical or the amount of compensation or fee that our team works very hard for. We bring a lot of value to the table, and as much as we love our clients, it is a for-profit business. I know everybody watching this understands that. So, but we have found is that you're not doing a client a favor by letting them go look at homes for 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, falling in love with the home, and then a very difficult conversation because it happens to be a home where we're not being compensated, and now we have to bring up a very difficult, maybe awkward conversation at that time, when really, if we really care about your experience, and to ensure that best experience, we need to slow down and educate you up front. So this has already been a process of ours anyways. What it looks like to onboard you as a client, we have that conversation. That way you have full transparency and knowledge moving forward. So that is going to continue for us. There'll be no surprises. That's going to be our first step. Before we can show you a home, we'll have to sit down and talk through the process with you. So again, in closing, this is a longer video, but there's so much going on. If you have any questions, please reach out. This is not something I can do in a few-minute video. We would love to take a few minutes and just make sure you have your questions answered. How does this affect you or a family member who might be walking through a transaction in the near future? But again, I'll end with this. Number one, loving Las Vegas through real estate is our mission. That's our passion. And we want to do this by just being available to make sure you get your questions answered. So reach out to us. And again, I know it sounds like a cute little tagline, who you work with matters, but for real, now more than ever, who you work with really matters. Thanks so much.